The words still echoed in my head 3 months later, sharp as broken glass cutting through every quiet moment. I tried to steal for myself. "Enjoy your poverty, Marcus." That's what Vanessa said as she walked out of our apartment. Her apartment now. Technically, since my name had never made it onto the lease. She'd made sure of that. I stood there in the doorway with a cardboard box of my belongings, clutched against my chest like a shield that had already failed me, watching her fold herself into a silver Mercedes I'd never seen before. The man in the driver's seat didn't even glance my way. Why would he? I was already erased. I remember the sound of my heart breaking wasn't dramatic at all. It was quiet. It was the small gasp of air leaving my lungs and not quite coming back. It was the way my hands started trembling so badly I almost dropped the box, and how I had to set it down on the hallway floor and press my palms against my thighs to make them stop. 3 years. 3 years of loving her, of working double shifts at the restaurant where I managed the kitchen, of saving every spare dollar for the ring I'd hidden in my sock drawer. 3 years of believing that love was enough. That hard work and dedication and showing up every single day meant something. I was wrong. The apartment I found after that was a fourth-floor walk-up in a building that smelled like old cigarettes and broken dreams. The elevator had been broken for 6 months. According to Mrs. Chen, who lived on the second floor, she told me this while I was hauling my pathetic box of belongings up the stairs, pausing on each landing to catch my breath. "Young man like you shouldn't have trouble with stairs," she said, eyeing me with the kind of knowing look that suggested she understood exactly what kind of trouble had landed me here. "It's not the stairs, Mrs. Chen," I said, trying to smile. "It's everything else." She nodded sagely. "Everything else is always heavier." My new place was 300 square feet of faded linoleum and walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's television through the plaster. But it was mine, sort of. For as long as I could make rent anyway. I set the box down in the middle of the empty room and looked around at the space that would contain my entire existence for the foreseeable future. A hot plate would sit on that counter. My mattress would go against that wall. I'd hang my 3 work shirts in that tiny closet and try not to think about the walk-in closet at Vanessa's place, stuffed with her designer clothes and shoes that cost more than I made in a week. The thought made something twist painfully in my chest, right behind my sternum. Shame, maybe, or anger, or some toxic combination of both that tasted like copper pennies on my tongue. I'd met Vanessa at a charity gala where I'd been working as part of the catering team. The event had been held at the Rothschild estate, one of those old money mansions that looked like it had been transplanted directly from a European countryside. And I'd been so focused on not spilling champagne on anyone important that I literally bumped into her near the garden terrace. "I'm so sorry," I'd said immediately, steadying the tray of hors d'oeuvres before any could fall. "Are you all right?" She'd laughed, and it was like hearing music for the first time. "I'm fine, though you look like you've seen a ghost." "Just trying not to get fired," I admitted, glancing nervously toward my supervisor. "For bumping into someone? That seems harsh." She'd studied me with these incredibly green eyes that seemed to see more than I was comfortable with. "What's your name?" "Marcus. Marcus Webb." "Well, Marcus Webb, I'm Vanessa, and I promise not to get you fired." She'd plucked a canapé from my tray and popped it into her mouth. "These are delicious, by the way. Did you make them?" I had, actually. The executive chef had given me free rein with the appetizers that night. I told her so, and she'd smiled wider. "A chef. I should have guessed from the way you're holding that tray, like it matters." "Everything matters," I'd said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "If you're going to do something, you should do it right." She'd looked at me for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "I like that. Most people in this room don't believe anything matters at all." We'd talked for 20 minutes while I was supposed to be circulating with appetizers. She'd made me laugh. She'd seemed genuinely interested in my dreams of opening my own restaurant someday, in the recipes my grandmother had taught me before she died. in the way I saw food as a language that could communicate love and comfort and home. When she'd asked for my number, I'd thought I was dreaming. The first 3 months were magic. Pure, uncomplicated magic. She'd shown up at the restaurant where I worked and sat at the bar, watching me move through the kitchen with what looked like admiration. She'd let me cook for her in my tiny studio apartment, curled up on my second-hand couch with a glass of wine while I worked. She'd made me feel like I was enough, like I was more than enough. "You're brilliant," she'd said once, after I'd made her pasta carbonara from scratch. "You know that, right? You're going to be something incredible someday." I'd believed her. God help me, I'd believed every word. The shift had been gradual. So gradual I didn't notice it happening until it was too late. First, it was suggestions about my appearance. "You'd look so handsome in a better suit, Marcus. Let me buy you one." Then it was comments about my job. "You're too talented to be working in someone else's kitchen. Why don't you look for something more ambitious?" But ambitious required capital I didn't have. It required connections I hadn't made. It required the kind of safety net that came from money, and I was living paycheck to paycheck, saving what I could, but never quite saving enough. When she suggested I move in with her, I'd hesitated. "I can't afford half the rent on your place, Vanessa. You know that. So don't pay half. Pay what you can. We'll figure it out." We didn't figure it out. Instead, every month became a small humiliation. Every time I handed her a check for my portion, never quite half, never quite enough, I felt myself shrinking. She never said anything, but I could see it in her eyes. The way she looked at the check before tucking it away. The way she'd mention, casually, how her friend's boyfriend had just gotten a promotion. How another friend was dating someone who'd started their own tech company. I'd worked harder, taken on extra shifts, started freelancing on my days off, cooking for private dinner parties. Anything to bring in more money. But it was never enough to close the gap between us. The gap that had always been there, but that I'd been too in love to see clearly. Then Bradley Morrison entered the picture. I'd come home. Early one day, the restaurant had lost power and we'd had to close, and found them on the terrace of her apartment. Not doing anything inappropriate, just talking. But the way he looked at her, the way she laughed at whatever he was saying, I felt it in my gut. The beginning of the end. "Marcus," she'd said brightly when she noticed me. "You're home early. This is Bradley. We were just discussing the charity gala next month." Bradley had stood and offered his hand. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having worried about money a day in his life. "Marcus, Vanessa's told me a lot about you. You're the chef, right?" The chef, not her boyfriend, not her partner, the chef. "That's right," I'd said, shaking his hand and feeling the expensive watch on his wrist brush against my skin. "Must be rewarding work," he'd said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've always admired people who work with their hands. I'd wanted to tell him that cooking wasn't just working with your hands, that it was art and science and soul all combined. But I'd just nodded and excused myself, feeling distinctly like I'd interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. After that, Bradley was everywhere. At the dinners Vanessa invited me to. At the social events I felt increasingly out of place, always impeccably dressed, always saying the right thing, always seeming to know exactly what Vanessa needed before she knew it herself. I'd tried to compete. God, I'd tried. I'd surprised her with a picnic I'd spent hours preparing. Every dish crafted with love and attention. She'd smiled and said it was sweet. But she'd seemed distracted the whole time, checking her phone every few minutes. I'd saved up and bought her an expensive necklace for her birthday, stretching my budget to breaking. She'd thanked me and put it in her jewelry box, and I never saw her wear it once. I'd done everything I could think of to be the man she wanted. But the truth was simple and devastating. I wasn't Bradley Morrison. I didn't have his money, his connections, his pedigree. I just had myself, and myself wasn't enough. The end came on a Tuesday evening. I'd planned to propose that weekend. The ring was in my pocket when I came home from work, my heart full of nervous hope despite everything. I'd found her sitting on the couch, looking composed and beautiful and somehow already distant. "We need to talk," she'd said. 4 words that changed everything. I've been thinking a lot about us, she'd continued, her voice careful and measured. About what we want from life, where we're going. I know things have been hard, I'd started, but she'd held up a hand. It's not about hard, Marcus. It's about reality. We're in different places in our lives. Different levels. Different levels. Like we were characters in a video game, and she'd somehow leveled up, while I'd stayed stuck at the beginning. I love you, I'd said, the words desperate and raw. We can make this work. I'm working on a business plan for the restaurant. I've got some investors interested. Bradley asked me to marry him. The room had tilted. Or maybe I'd tilted, and the room stayed still. I couldn't tell anymore. And I said yes. The ring in my pocket felt like a lead weight, pulling me down through the floor, through the building, through the earth itself. I need you to move out, she'd said. And there was something almost like pity in her voice, which was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. I'm sorry, Marcus. You're a good person. You'll make someone very happy someday. Someone more appropriate for your lifestyle. I'd packed my things in a daze, shoving clothes and books and kitchen tools into a box while she watched from the doorway. When I'd turned to leave, she'd been standing there with her arms crossed, looking at me like I was a problem she'd finally solved. I wish you well, she'd said. I really do. And then, as I'd reached the door, she'd said it. The words that would haunt me for months. Enjoy your poverty, Marcus. Part 2. The Descent. The first month in my new apartment was a study in survival. I worked 60-hour weeks at the restaurant, came home to my empty 300-square-foot box, and tried not to think about what I'd lost. Or more accurately, what I'd never really had to begin with. I'd been a placeholder, a pleasant diversion, the kind of boyfriend you had when you wanted to feel like a good person who didn't care about money, right up until someone with actual money showed interest. The wound festered. I tried to keep busy, tried to focus on work. But everywhere I looked, I saw reminders. A couple holding hands on the street, an engagement announcement on social media, a wedding invitation from a coworker who'd been dating his girlfriend for half as long as I'd been with Vanessa. I started declining invitations to go out, stopped responding to texts from friends who wanted to grab drinks or catch up. What was the point? What did I have to offer anyone? I was a 32-year-old line cook living in a shoebox, eating ramen most nights to save money, watching my dreams of opening a restaurant drift further away with every passing day. Mrs. Chen would knock on my door sometimes with containers of soup or dumplings. "You're too thin," she'd say. "A chef who doesn't eat, that's not right." "I eat, Mrs. Chen." "You exist." "That's different from eating." She'd push the container into my hands. Food is love. When we forget that, we forget how to be human. Her kindness made my chest ache. I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve much of anything, apparently. 2 months after the breakup, I got mugged. It was my own fault. I'd stayed late at work and decided to walk home instead of taking the bus, trying to save the $3. The guy had come out of nowhere, shoved me against a wall, demanded my wallet. I'd given it to him. There was $43 inside. My entire liquid net worth? That's it? He'd said, sounding disappointed. Man, you're broke. Even muggers were judging me now. I'd walked the rest of the way home in a daze, my shoulder aching where I'd hit the wall, my hands still shaking. When I'd gotten to my apartment, I'd sat down on my mattress on the floor and laughed. Just laughed until tears were streaming down my face, and I couldn't tell if I was laughing or crying anymore. Rock bottom, I'd thought. This is what rock bottom feels like. I was wrong. Rock bottom came the next week. I'd been called into the office at the restaurant. Chef Pietro, the owner and head chef, had looked uncomfortable. We'd worked together for 5 years. He'd taught me most of what I knew about Italian cuisine. He'd been the one to tell me I had real talent, that I could go far if I kept working hard. "Marcus," he'd said, not meeting my eyes, "I need to talk to you about something." My stomach had dropped. I'd known what was coming before he said it. "The restaurant's not doing well. We've been operating in the red for 6 months now. I've tried everything, but..." He'd spread his hands helplessly. "I'm going to have to let you go. You and 3 others. I'm so sorry. I'd nodded numbly. When? End of the week. I'll give you severance, 2 weeks' pay. It's all I can manage. 2 weeks' pay, maybe $600 after taxes. Maybe enough to cover next month's rent if I didn't eat or turn on the heat or do anything except exist in my box and wait to stop existing. I'll write you a great reference, Pietro had said. You're one of the best cooks I've ever worked with. You'll land on your feet. But I didn't land on my feet. I fell, and I kept falling. The job applications went nowhere. Everywhere I applied, I got the same response. Overqualified, underqualified. Not the right fit, position filled. We'll keep your resume on file. The restaurant industry had dried up after the pandemic, and everyone was competing for fewer and fewer positions. My savings evaporated. First the 2 weeks severance, then the small emergency fund I'd been building, then the money I'd saved for the engagement ring, which I'd gotten back only a fraction of from the jeweler. Store credit only, they'd said, and I'd wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. I started selling things. My television, my laptop. The nice knife set Pietro had given me as a Christmas bonus 3 years ago. Each sale felt like cutting away another piece of myself, but I needed to make rent, needed to eat, needed to survive. Mrs. Chen kept bringing food. I tried to refuse, but she wouldn't hear it. You helped me carry groceries last month when my back was bad, she'd said. This is paying back. This is how neighbors work. I hadn't remembered helping her with groceries. It had seemed like nothing at the time, but now it felt like everything. 3.5 months after Vanessa left, I was down to my last $100. Rent was due in a week. I had no job, no prospects, and no idea what to do next. I sat on my mattress and looked around at the bare walls of my apartment. No pictures, no decorations, nothing that made this place feel like home. It was just a box I paid to exist in until I couldn't pay anymore. My phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Marcus Webb? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. Yes. Mr. Webb, this is Catherine Hartley from Hartley, Chen and Associates. I'm an attorney. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. My heart sank. What now? Had I forgotten to pay some bill? Was I being sued for something? I'm calling regarding the estate of Eleanor Ashford, she continued. I understand you may not be familiar with that name, but… Eleanor Ashford? I interrupted. The name struck something deep in my memory. My grandmother's name was Eleanor. Eleanor Webb. Yes, she was born Eleanor Ashford. Mr. Webb, I need you to come to my office. There are some matters we need to discuss in person. Would tomorrow at 10 work for you? I almost laughed. I don't have anything else scheduled. Excellent. I'll text you the address. Mr. Webb, I think you should prepare yourself. This conversation may be quite surprising. She hung up before I could ask what she meant. Hartley, Chen and Associates occupied the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise, the kind of building I'd walked past 1,000 times, without ever imagining I'd go inside. The lobby was all marble and glass, the elevator so smooth I barely felt it moving. I'd worn my only remaining good shirt and the pants I used to wear to nice dinners with Vanessa. They felt loose now. I'd lost weight over the past few months, but they were all I had. The receptionist directed me to a conference room, where Catherine Hartley was waiting. She was maybe 50, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that took in everything about me in one glance. Mr. Webb, thank you for coming. She gestured to a chair. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Water would be good. She poured from a pitcher on the table, and I tried not to gulp it down too quickly. When had I last drunk water that cold, that clean? Mr. Webb, she began, settling into the chair across from me. What do you know about your grandmother's family history? Not much, I admitted. She raised me after my parents died when I was 8. Car accident. She never talked much about her past. I know she grew up somewhere back east, but she moved to California before my mom was born. She died when I was 23. Breast cancer. Catherine nodded, making notes. And she never mentioned the Ashford family? No, should she have? Catherine pulled out a thick folder. The Ashford family is one of the oldest and wealthiest families in America. They made their fortune in shipping and railroads in the 19th century, then diversified into real estate, technology, and various other ventures. The family trust is worth approximately $800 million. I stared at her. The number was so large it didn't feel real. 800 million. I couldn't even conceptualize that amount of money. I don't understand what this has to do with my grandmother. Your grandmother was Eleanor Ann Ashford, eldest daughter of William Ashford III. She was next in line to inherit a significant portion of the family fortune. Catherine paused until she fell in love with your grandfather. She pulled out an old photograph and slid it across the table. A young woman, my grandmother, though so young, I barely recognized her, stood next to a tall man with kind eyes and rough hands. They were both smiling, standing in front of what looked like a small house. "James Webb," Catherine said. "Your grandfather. He was a carpenter. A good man by all accounts, but not the kind of man the Ashfords wanted their daughter to marry." I traced my finger along the edge of the photograph. My grandmother's smile was radiant, genuine. I'd never seen her look that happy in any of the photos from my childhood. "They gave her an ultimatum," Catherine continued. "Leave James and return to the family, or be cut off completely." "She chose James. She chose love," I said quietly. "Yes, and she lost everything else. The Ashfords disowned her, removed her from all family records. Your grandmother worked as a seamstress and cleaned houses while your grandfather worked construction. They raised your mother in a small apartment in Oakland. Your grandmother never spoke to her family again." "Why are you telling me this now?" "If she was disowned, because William Ashford III, your great-grandfather, died 6 months ago, and before he died, he changed his will." Catherine pulled out another document. "He never stopped looking for Eleanor. Hired private investigators over the years, kept track of her life from a distance. When she died, he was, by all accounts, devastated. He regretted the ultimatum, regretted losing his daughter. And he spent the last years of his life trying to make amends the only way he knew how." She pushed the document toward me. "He left a significant portion of his estate to Eleanor's descendants. That means you, Mr. Webb. You're his only surviving direct descendant from Eleanor's line." The numbers on the page swam before my eyes. I couldn't make sense of them at first. Too many zeros. It had to be a mistake. "Mr. Webb, you've inherited approximately $250 million. The room tilted. Or I tilted. I couldn't tell anymore. That's not possible." "I assure you it's quite possible. And quite real." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but the contact information we had was outdated. Your grandmother moved several times over the years, and tracking you down took some time. $250 million. I thought about the $100 in my bank account, the rent I couldn't pay, the ramen I'd been living on, the television I'd sold for $60 to make it through another week." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all, being told I'd inherited a fortune while sitting in clothes that were too big for me because I'd been half-starving. Being told I was connected to one of America's wealthiest families while living in an apartment that smelled like cigarettes and failure. "Mr. Webb?" Catherine looked concerned. "Are you all right?" "My girlfriend left me because I was poor," I said, still laughing, tears streaming down my face. "She left me for a millionaire. And I'm sitting here being told I'm worth $250 million. Catherine handed me a box of tissues. "Life," she said dryly, "has a twisted sense of humor." I wiped my eyes, tried to breathe normally. "What happens now?" "Now we go through the formal process of transferring the inheritance. There are properties involved: the Ashford estate in Connecticut, several vacation homes, a penthouse in Manhattan. There are also trust funds, stock portfolios, and various business holdings. We'll need to spend some time going over everything. I don't know anything about managing that kind of money. That's what I'm here for. And there's a team of financial advisors who have been managing the Ashford assets for decades. They'll help you navigate everything." She smiled slightly. "Mr. Webb, You'll never have to worry about money again. Never have to worry about money again. The concept was so foreign I couldn't grasp it. There's one more thing, Catherine said. Your great-grandfather left you a letter. Would you like to read it? She handed me an envelope, thick, cream-colored paper with my name written in careful script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Dear Marcus, if you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've learned about the family you never knew you had. I can only imagine what you must be feeling. Shock, confusion, perhaps anger at the years that were lost. Want you to know that losing Eleanor was the greatest regret of my life. She was my daughter, and I loved her more than I can express. But I let pride and tradition dictate my choices. I let my fear of what others would think destroy the relationship with the person I loved most in this world. I tracked your grandmother over the years. I know she built a good life with James. I know they were happy, despite having so little. I know she raised your mother to be strong and kind. And I know she raised you after tragedy took your parents from you far too soon. I never reached out because I didn't think I had the right. I had made my choice, and Eleanor had made hers. But I followed your life from afar. I know about your talent in the kitchen. I know about your dreams of opening a restaurant. I know you inherited your grandmother's kindness and your grandfather's work ethic. This inheritance is my way of apologizing to Eleanor, even though she's no longer here to receive it. It's my way of trying to right a terrible wrong. But more than that, it's my way of telling you that you come from a family that survived despite everything. Eleanor survived being cut off from her family. She survived poverty. She survived loss. And she raised you to survive too. But Marcus, I don't just want you to survive. I want you to thrive. Use this money to build the life you've dreamed of. Use it to create something beautiful. Use it to make a difference in the world. And remember, wealth isn't about the money in your bank account. It's about the richness of your character, the depth of your compassion, the strength of your principles. Eleanor knew that. She chose love over money, and she never regretted it. I regretted my choice every day. Choose wisely, my grandson. Choose love. Choose meaning. Choose to be the man your grandmother raised you to be. With all my regrets and all my love, William Ashford III. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table, my throat too tight to speak. Take your time, Catherine said gently. I thought about my grandmother, the woman who'd raised me in a small house, who'd worked her fingers to the bone to give me a good life, who'd never once mentioned that she'd come from money, who'd taught me that food was love, that hard work mattered, that character was everything. She'd chosen love. She'd chosen my grandfather over a fortune, and she'd never looked back. The first thing I did with my new fortune was pay 6 months' rent in advance on my tiny apartment. Mrs. Chen happened to be in the hallway when I came home, and she noticed something different in the way I carried myself. Good news? She asked. Very good news, Mrs. Chen. I smiled at her, a real smile for the first time in months. Remember how you said neighbors help each other? Of course. How would you feel about letting me pay for that back surgery you mentioned? The one your insurance won't cover? Her eyes widened. I couldn't possibly. You brought me food when I was too broke to eat properly. You showed me kindness when I had nothing. Let me do this, please. She studied my face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You're a good boy, Marcus. Your grandmother raised you right. I arranged for Mrs. Chen's surgery the next day. Then I called Pietro and paid off all the restaurant's debts, anonymously. Then I created a fund to help the other employees who'd been laid off. Catherine set me up with the financial team, and they walked me through everything. The properties, the investments, the trusts. It was overwhelming, but they were patient, explaining everything in terms I could understand. What do you want to do? The lead advisor, a calm woman named Janet, asked me, What are your goals? I thought about it for a long time. I want to open a restaurant, a real one. The kind of place my grandmother would have been proud of. Somewhere that serves good food at prices normal people can afford. Somewhere that feels like home. Okay, Janet said, making notes. What else? I want to set up a culinary scholarship fund. For kids who want to go to cooking school but can't afford it. Good. What else? I want to buy the building where my apartment is and fix it up. New elevator, proper heating, renovated units. But I want to keep the rent affordable. Mrs. Chen and the others who live there, they're good people who deserve better. Janet smiled. You're going to do just fine, Marcus. Over the next few weeks, I started putting plans into motion. I hired an architect to draw up plans for the restaurant. I found a location, a beautiful old building, in a neighborhood that was struggling but full of potential. I started interviewing staff, looking for people with talent and passion who just needed a chance. And slowly, carefully, I started to heal. The wound Vanessa had left was still there, but it wasn't festering anymore. Instead, it was teaching me something important, that my worth had never been tied to my bank account, that the person I was when I had nothing was the same person I was now that I had everything. I thought about reaching out to her sometimes, thought about telling her what had happened. But every time I considered it, I remembered my great-grandfather's letter. Choose wisely, he'd written. Choose love. Choose meaning. Vanessa hadn't chosen me when I had nothing. I didn't need her now that I had everything. 3 months after learning about my inheritance, I was at the construction site of my new restaurant when a familiar figure approached. Bradley Morrison, looking expensive and polished in a suit that probably cost more than my old monthly salary. Marcus Webb, he said, offering his hand. I wasn't sure it was you at first. You look different. I shook his hand, feeling completely calm. Different how? I don't know. More confident, maybe. I heard through the grapevine that you're opening a restaurant. I'm actually in commercial real estate development now. If you're looking for investors, I'm self-funding, I said simply. But thank you. His eyebrows rose slightly. Self-funding a project this size? You must have come into some money. Something like that. He looked around at the construction, clearly recalculating his assessment of me. Well, congratulations. Vanessa mentioned you'd always wanted your own place. How is Vanessa? I asked, and was surprised to find I genuinely wanted to know. Not because I missed her, but because I was curious what had happened to the person who'd been so certain that money was everything. Good. We got married last month. Small ceremony. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. She's already planning the next one. Says, we need to do it properly with all the family and friends. Congratulations, I said, and meant it. We talked for a few more minutes about mundane things. The neighborhood, the restaurant industry, the weather. Then he left, and I went back to discussing finish work with the contractor. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. Bradley told me he ran into you. I heard about your restaurant. That's wonderful. I always knew you had it in you. V. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even the echo of old pain. Just nothing. I deleted the text without responding. 6 months after learning about my inheritance, Webb's opened its doors. The restaurant was everything I'd dreamed of. Warm lighting, comfortable seating, an open kitchen where diners could watch us cook. The menu featured my grandmother's recipes alongside my own creations, comfort food, elevated but never pretentious. Prices were reasonable. Quality was impeccable. I'd hired a diverse staff, many of them people who'd been overlooked by fancier establishments. Single mothers who needed flexible schedules. Former convicts trying to rebuild their lives. Young people with talent, but no formal training. I paid them well, offered full benefits, and created an environment where they could grow. Opening night was invitation only. Mrs. Chen sat at the best table, beaming with pride. Pietro came with his wife, tears in his eyes when he tasted the osso buco. The other staff members I'd worked with at the old restaurant were there too, laughing and toasting to new beginnings. Catherine Hartley came, along with Janet and several members of the financial team. They'd become not just advisors but friends, guiding me through this strange new world I'd inherited. Your grandmother would be so proud, Catherine said, raising her glass. To Eleanor, who knew that the best fortune is a life well lived. To Eleanor, everyone echoed. I stood at the kitchen pass, watching the room full of people who'd helped me get here, and felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not happiness, exactly. Something deeper. Purpose, belonging, home. A young man approached, maybe 20, with nervous eyes and a portfolio clutched in his hands. One of the scholarship recipients from the fund I'd established. Chef Webb, I just wanted to thank you. This scholarship changed my life. I start at culinary school next month. What's your name? David. David Chen. I'm Mrs. Chen's grandson. I smiled. She told me about you. You're going to do great things, David. I want to be like you someday, he said earnestly. Someone who makes a difference. After he walked away, Mrs. Chen appeared at my elbow. He's a good boy, like you. You know what I think? What's that, Mrs. Chen? I think your grandmother is watching. I think she's happy. Not because of the money. That was never what mattered. But because you used what you were given to create something beautiful. Because you remembered where you came from. Because you chose to lift others up instead of just lifting yourself. She patted my arm and returned to her table, leaving me standing there with tears in my eyes. The restaurant was a success from the first night. Reviews poured in, all glowing. Reservations filled up weeks in advance. We had to expand the staff within 2 months. But the part that mattered most to me was watching families come in for affordable celebrations, seeing first dates and anniversaries and simple Tuesday night dinners, hearing someone say, "This tastes like home," or "This reminds me of my grandmother's cooking," or "I've never felt so welcome in a restaurant before." One evening, about 8 months after opening, I was expediting during dinner service when the hostess approached with an uncertain expression. "Chef, there's someone asking to see you." She says she's an old friend. I already knew who it was before I walked out to the dining room. Vanessa stood near the entrance, dressed impeccably as always, but something was different. The confidence that had once radiated from her seemed dimmed somehow. She smiled when she saw me, but it was tentative. "Marcus, the restaurant is beautiful. I've been trying to get a reservation for weeks." "We're busy," I said simply. "What can I do for you, Vanessa?" She glanced around, taking in the warm atmosphere, the happy diners, the success of everything surrounding us. Mani four. I wanted to apologize for how I ended things, for what I said. It was cruel. Nodded slowly. Yes, it was. I've been thinking about you a lot. About us. I made a mistake, Marcus. I chose the wrong things. I thought money would make me happy. But she reached out, as if to touch my arm, then let her hand drop. Bradley and I are getting divorced. He's not who I thought he was. The money doesn't fix anything. If the person is wrong, there was a time when hearing those words would have meant everything to me. A time when I would have desperately wanted her to realize what she'd lost, to regret her choice, to see my worth. But standing there, in the restaurant I'd built, surrounded by the life I'd created, I felt only a distant kind of sadness for her. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I genuinely was. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "Marcus, I was wondering," she hesitated, "do you think we could try again? Start over? I see now what really matters. You were right all along about the important things." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had once meant everything to me, and I saw her clearly for the first time. Not as the goddess I'd put on a pedestal, not as the villain who'd crushed me, but simply as a person who'd made choices she now regretted. "Vanessa, when you left me, you said enjoy your poverty. And you know what? I have. Not the literal poverty. That was hard, and it hurt, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But the poverty of having nothing taught me something invaluable. It taught me who I am when everything is stripped away. It taught me what really matters." I gestured around the restaurant. "I didn't build this to prove you wrong. I didn't become successful to win you back. I did this because it's what I was meant to do. Because my grandmother taught me that food is love, and love is the only wealth that really matters." "So is that a no?" Her voice was small. "That's a no. Not because I haven't forgiven you, I have, but because we were never right for each other. You needed someone who could give you a certain kind of life. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I needed someone who could see me when I had nothing and still choose me. You couldn't do that then, and I don't need you to do it now." She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. You've become someone amazing, Marcus. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I was always this person, Vanessa. You just weren't looking at the right things. She left without ordering, and I returned to the kitchen, to the controlled chaos of dinner service, to the work that had always made me feel most alive. Later that night, after the last diners had left and the staff had cleaned up and gone home, I sat alone in the dining room with a glass of wine and my grandmother's recipe book. I'd found it among her things after she died, filled with handwritten notes and food-stained pages and little comments in the margins. James loved this one. Made it for Marcus's birthday. Perfect for cold nights. Every recipe was a love letter. Every stain was evidence of meals shared, of people fed, of love expressed in the most primal, essential way. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The heartbreak, the poverty, the desperate months of not knowing how I'd survive. The shocking revelation that changed everything. The choices I'd made about how to use the fortune I'd inherited. My great-grandfather had written that wealth wasn't about money in a bank account, but about the richness of character, the depth of compassion, the strength of principles. He'd been right. The money had given me options, had made it possible to build this dream. But the real wealth had been there all along, planted by a grandmother who'd chosen love over fortune, who'd raised me to believe that character mattered more than status, that feeding people was a sacred act, that showing up with integrity was its own reward. When Vanessa left me, I'd thought I was worthless. I'd measured my value by my bank account and found myself desperately lacking. But I'd been looking at the wrong metrics all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. My grandson can't stop talking about the scholarship. Thank you for being the kind of man who remembers where he came from. I texted back, thank you for being the kind of person who feeds hungry neighbors. You taught me more about wealth than any bank account ever could. Another text came in, this one from Catherine Hartley. Took a client to Webb's tonight. She wants to invest in more restaurants. Are you interested in expanding? I thought about it. More restaurants, more people fed, more jobs created, more scholarships funded, more lives changed. Let's talk, I wrote back. But only if we can do it right. Quality over quantity. People over profit. That's exactly what she said she wants. Your great-grandfather would be proud, Marcus. I poured myself another glass of wine and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood I was now part of. The streetlights glowed softly. A couple walked by holding hands, laughing about something. A cat darted across the street. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably in her expensive apartment, dealing with her divorce, wondering how her careful plans had gone so wrong. I hoped she'd find happiness eventually. I hoped she'd learn what my grandmother had known all along, that love and meaning couldn't be bought, only built. And somewhere beyond all this, in whatever comes after, I imagined my grandmother smiling, not because of the money or the success or the revenge against the woman who'd wronged me, but because I'd remembered what she taught me, because I'd chosen to use what I'd been given to create something good, because I'd discovered that my worth had never been tied to my bank account. It had been there all along, in the way I treated people, in the food I created, in the kindness I showed to struggling neighbors. Vanessa had told me to enjoy my poverty, and in a strange way, I had. It had stripped away everything false and shown me what remained when all the pretense was gone. And what remained was enough, more than enough. I raised my glass to the window, to the night, to my grandmother's memory, to the strange and winding road that had brought me here. Thank you, I whispered, for the poverty and the fortune both, for teaching me the difference between them, for showing me that the real inheritance was never the money. It was learning who I am when everything else is taken away. The restaurant would open again tomorrow. We'd feed people who were celebrating and people who were struggling, families and first dates and old friends reuniting. We'd turn ingredients into comfort, recipes into memories, meals into moments that mattered. And I would go home to my penthouse because, yes, I'd eventually moved out of that tiny apartment, though I'd kept my promise to renovate the building and keep Mrs. Chen's rent affordable. I'd go home to my beautiful space with its view of the city, and I'd sleep well. Not because of the thread count of the sheets or the size of my bank account, but because I knew exactly who I was and what I stood for. Vanessa had left me for a millionaire, thinking that money was the measure of a man. But she'd been wrong. I'd discovered something far more valuable than her millionaire could ever give her. I'd discovered myself. Not the self that performed for approval or measured his worth by his wallet, but the self that had been there all along, resilient, creative, kind, worthy. That self had always been rich. I'd just been looking at the wrong balance sheet. Webb's had expanded to 6 locations across 3 cities. Every restaurant operated on the same principles. Excellent food at reasonable prices. Staff treated with dignity and paid well. A commitment to the community. The scholarship fund had sent 43 students to culinary school. 5 of them now worked in my kitchens, including David Chen, who'd just been promoted to sous chef. I'd also started a foundation that provided small business loans to aspiring restaurant owners, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds, because I remembered what it felt like to have a dream and no capital to pursue it. Mrs. Chen had become the unofficial grandmother of all my restaurants. She'd pop in unannounced, taste everything, and tell me exactly what she thought. Her honesty was brutal and beautiful. I dated occasionally over the years, but nothing serious. I was content. Happy even. Building something that mattered felt more fulfilling than any relationship built on shallow foundations ever could. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a woman came into the flagship location just as we were closing. She was maybe 30, with flour on her jeans and exhaustion in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I know you're closed. I've been trying to get here for weeks, but I work 2 jobs, and this is the first time I could make it. And I've heard such amazing things. And," she stopped, embarrassed. "I'm rambling. I'm sorry. I'll come back another time." "Wait," I said. "Have you eaten today?" She hesitated. "I had breakfast." "Sit down. Let me make you something. I can't pay for it's on the house. Sit." I went to the kitchen and made her the dish my grandmother used to make when I'd had a bad day. Pasta with butter, garlic, and parmesan, with a side of roasted vegetables. Simple, comforting, home. When I brought it out, she'd removed her jacket. Underneath, she wore a t-shirt from a local culinary school. "You're a chef?" I asked. "Trying to be. I'm in my final year, working at a catering company and a coffee shop to pay tuition. It's a lot, but it's worth it. This is what I'm meant to do." She took a bite and I would go home to my penthouse because, yes, I'd eventually moved out of that tiny apartment, though I'd kept my promise to renovate the building and keep Mrs. Chen's rent affordable. I'd go home to my beautiful space with its view of the city, and I'd sleep well. Not because of the thread count of the sheets or the size of my bank account, but because I knew exactly who I was and what I stood for. Vanessa had left me for a millionaire, thinking that money was the measure of a man. But she'd been wrong. I'd discovered something far more valuable than her millionaire could ever give her. I'd discovered myself. Not the self that performed for approval or measured his worth by his wallet, but the self that had been there all along, resilient, creative, kind, worthy. That self had always been rich. I'd just been looking at the wrong balance sheet. Webb's had expanded to 6 locations across 3 cities. Every restaurant operated on the same principles. Excellent food at reasonable prices. Staff treated with dignity and paid well. A commitment to the community. The scholarship fund had sent 43 students to culinary school. 5 of them now worked in my kitchens, including David Chen, who'd just been promoted to sous chef. I'd also started a foundation that provided small business loans to aspiring restaurant owners, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds, because I remembered what it felt like to have a dream and no capital to pursue it. Mrs. Chen had become the unofficial grandmother of all my restaurants. She'd pop in unannounced, taste everything, and tell me exactly what she thought. Her honesty was brutal and beautiful. I dated occasionally over the years, but nothing serious. I was content. Happy even. Building something that mattered felt more fulfilling than any relationship built on shallow foundations ever could. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a woman came into the flagship location just as we were closing. She was maybe 30, with flour on her jeans and exhaustion in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I know you're closed. I just, I've been trying to get here for weeks. But I work 2 jobs, and this is the first time I could make it. And I've heard such amazing things. And," she stopped, embarrassed. "I'm rambling. I'm sorry. I'll come back another time." "Wait," I said. "Have you eaten today?" She hesitated. "I had breakfast." "Sit down. Let me make you something. I can't pay for it's on the house. Sit." I went to the kitchen and made her the dish my grandmother used to make when I'd had a bad day. Pasta with butter, garlic, and parmesan, with a side of roasted vegetables. Simple, comforting, home. When I brought it out, she'd removed her jacket. Underneath, she wore a T-shirt from a local culinary school. "You're a chef?" I asked. "Trying to be. I'm in my final year, working at a catering company and a coffee shop to pay tuition. It's a lot, but it's worth it. This is what I'm meant to do." She took a bite of, and I would go home to my penthouse because, yes, I'd eventually moved out of that tiny apartment, though I'd kept my promise to renovate the building and keep Mrs. Chen's rent affordable. I'd go home to my beautiful space with its view of the city, and I'd sleep well, not because of the thread count of the sheets or the size of my bank account, but because I knew exactly who I was and what I stood for. Vanessa had left me for a millionaire, thinking that money was the measure of a man. But she'd been wrong. I'd discovered something far more valuable than her millionaire could ever give her. I'd discovered myself. Not the self that performed for approval or measured his worth by his wallet, but the self that had been there all along, resilient, creative, kind, worthy. That self had always been rich. I'd just been looking at the wrong balance sheet. Webb's had expanded to 6 locations across 3 cities. Every restaurant operated on the same principles. Excellent food at reasonable prices. Staff treated with dignity and paid well. A commitment to the community. The scholarship fund had sent 43 students to culinary school. 5 of them now worked in my kitchens, including David Chen, who'd just been promoted to sous chef. I'd also started a foundation that provided small business loans to aspiring restaurant owners, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds, because I remembered what it felt like to have a dream and no capital to pursue it. Mrs. Chen had become the unofficial grandmother of all my restaurants. She'd pop in unannounced, taste everything, and tell me exactly what she thought. Her honesty was brutal and beautiful. I dated occasionally over the years, but nothing serious. I was content. Happy even. Building something that mattered felt more fulfilling than any relationship built on shallow foundations ever could. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a woman came into the flagship location just as we were closing. She was maybe 30, with flour on her jeans and exhaustion in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I know you're closed. I've been trying to get here for weeks. But I work 2 jobs, and this is the first time I could make it. And I've heard such amazing things. And," she stopped, embarrassed. "I'm rambling. I'm sorry. I'll come back another time." "Wait," I said. "Have you eaten today?" She hesitated. "I had breakfast." "Sit down. Let me make you something. I can't pay for it's on the house. Sit." I went to the kitchen and made her the dish my grandmother used to make when I'd had a bad day. Pasta with butter, garlic, and parmesan, with a side of roasted vegetables. Simple, comforting, home. When I brought it out, she'd removed her jacket. Underneath, she wore a T-shirt from a local culinary school. "You're a chef?" I asked. "Trying to be. I'm in my final year, working at a catering company and a coffee shop to pay tuition. It's a lot, but it's worth it. This is what I'm meant to do." She took a bite of the pasta and closed her eyes. "Oh my God, this is perfect. This tastes like everything's going to be okay." I smiled. That's exactly what food should taste like. We talked for 2 hours. Her name was Sophie. She'd grown up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18, and had been working ever since to build a life for herself. She wanted to open a bakery someday that would hire other foster youth, giving them the opportunities she'd had to fight for. When she finally left, she turned back at the door. "Thank you, chef, not just for the food, for seeing me, for treating me like I mattered." "You do matter," I said simply. "Keep going. You're going to do amazing things." After she left, I thought about the person I'd been 5 years ago. Broken, lost, measuring my worth by all the wrong things. I thought about Vanessa's cruel words and how they'd cut so deep, because some part of me had believed them. But I'd been wrong to believe them, just like Sophie would be wrong if she believed anyone who told her she didn't matter because she'd come from nothing. We all come from nothing in the end. We're born with empty hands. What we fill them with, that's what defines us. I pulled out my phone and texted my assistant. "Look into our scholarship recipients. There's a student named Sophie I met today. Final year at culinary school, working 2 jobs. I want to cover her remaining tuition and offer her a position when she graduates. Also, let's create a specific track for students aging out of foster care. They need more support." The response came back immediately. "On it. You're a good man, Marcus." I thought about that as I locked up the restaurant and walked out into the cool evening air. Was I a good man? I'd made plenty of mistakes. I'd been bitter and angry after Vanessa left. I'd measured my worth by my bank account, both when it was empty and when it suddenly overflowed. But I'd learned. I'd grown. I'd discovered that true wealth wasn't about what you had, but about what you gave, what you built, how you treated people when no one was watching. My grandmother had known that when she chose my grandfather over a fortune. My great-grandfather had learned it too late, but at least he'd learned it. And I'd learned it in a tiny apartment that smelled like cigarettes, eating ramen and listening to Mrs. Chen tell me that food was love. Vanessa had told me to enjoy my poverty, and standing there on the street outside the restaurant I'd built, with Sophie's gratitude still warming my chest, and plans forming in my mind for how to help more people like her, I realized something profound. I had enjoyed it. Not the hunger or the fear or the desperation, but what it had taught me. The poverty of having nothing had revealed the wealth of knowing who I was, and that was a fortune no one could ever take away. Smiled up at the stars barely visible through the city lights, thinking of my grandmother looking down, of my great-grandfather's letter, of all the pasta, and closed her eyes. "Oh my God, this is perfect. This tastes like everything's going to be okay." I smiled. That's exactly what food should taste like. We talked for 2 hours. Her name was Sophie. She'd grown up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18, and had been working ever since to build a life for herself. She wanted to open a bakery someday that would hire other foster youth, giving them the opportunities she'd had to fight for. When she finally left, she turned back at the door. "Thank you, chef, not just for the food, for seeing me, for treating me like I mattered." "You do matter," I said simply. "Keep going. You're going to do amazing things." After she left, I thought about the person I'd been 5 years ago. Broken, lost, measuring my worth by all the wrong things. I thought about Vanessa's cruel words and how they'd cut so deep, because some part of me had believed them. But I'd been wrong to believe them, just like Sophie would be wrong if she believed anyone who told her she didn't matter because she'd come from nothing. We all come from nothing in the end. We're born with empty hands. What we fill them with, that's what defines us. I pulled out my phone and texted my assistant. "Look into our scholarship recipients. There's a student named Sophie I met today. Final year at culinary school, working 2 jobs. I want to cover her remaining tuition and offer her a position when she graduates. Also, let's create a specific track for students aging out of foster care. They need more support." The response came back immediately. "On it. You're a good man, Marcus." I thought about that as I locked up the restaurant and walked out into the cool evening air. Was I a good man? I'd made plenty of mistakes. I'd been bitter and angry after Vanessa left. I'd measured my worth by my bank account, both when it was empty and when it suddenly overflowed. But I'd learned. I'd grown. I'd discovered that true wealth wasn't about what you had, but about what you gave, what you built, how you treated people when no one was watching. My grandmother had known that when she chose my grandfather over a fortune. My great-grandfather had learned it too late, but at least he'd learned it. And I'd learned it in a tiny apartment that smelled like cigarettes, eating ramen and listening to Mrs. Chen tell me that food was love. Vanessa had told me to enjoy my poverty, and standing there on the street outside the restaurant I'd built, with Sophie's gratitude still warming my chest, and plans forming in my mind for how to help more people like her, I realized something profound. I had enjoyed it. Not the hunger or the fear or the desperation, but what it had taught me. The poverty of having nothing had revealed the wealth of knowing who I was, and that was a fortune no one could ever take away. Smiled up at the stars barely visible, through the city lights, thinking of my grandmother looking down, of my great-grandfather's letter, of all the people who'd shaped me into who I'd become. I'm rich, I said to the night. Not because of the money, because of everything else. The street was quiet. A slight breeze carried the smell of bread from the bakery down the block. Somewhere, a door opened and laughter spilled out. Life, in all its messy, beautiful complexity, continued on. And I was grateful for all of it. The heartbreak and the healing, the poverty and the fortune, the losing and the finding. Because it had all led me here, to this moment, to this understanding. My worth had never been in Vanessa's eyes or in my bank account. It had been in my hands all along, in what I created, in how I loved, in the way I showed up for others, in the simple act of feeding hungry people and making them feel seen. That was the real inheritance. That was the fortune that mattered. And finally, after everything, I knew it deep in my bones. I was enough. I had always been enough. And that was the richest feeling in the world. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and hope, please subscribe for more compelling narratives about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Hit that subscribe button and join our community. Thank you so much.